Okay, we're live. Morning, everyone.
Morning. Morning, Tom.
Julie, are we live?
Yes, we're good to go, Tom. You can do your introduction.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to what promises to be a truly wonderful encounter with a remarkably talented architect and artist, Michael Harris, who I'm also delighted to be able to call my friend. My name is Thomas Rajkovic, and I'm a member of the Education Committee for the Chicago Midwest chapter of the Institute of Classical Architecture and Art. For those of you not already familiar with our group, the Institute of Classical Architecture and Art is a nonprofit membership organization committed to promoting and preserving the practice, understanding, and appreciation of classical design in architecture and the allied arts. To do so, the ICAA offers a broad range of educational programs. These include intensives for architecture and design students, introductory programs for middle school students, lectures and walking tours for the public, continuing education courses for professionals and enthusiasts, travel programs to visit classical masterworks, the publishing of original and reprinted books, and an annual journal with which many of you are familiar entitled The Classicist. For additional information about our group, please visit our website at www.classicist.org. As our education committee was planning our events for this year on the heels of a very challenging and dispiriting 2020, we were determined to demonstrate that architecture is indeed an optimistic pursuit. In a late autumn meeting, my fellow committee member, Chicago architect Margaret Derwent Ketchum, suggested the chapter approach Mr. Harris, whose beautiful work, both drawn and built, is much admired by his professional peers and cherished by some 20,000 followers on social media. Simultaneously in Seattle, another good friend, the very talented architect Duncan McRoberts, president and founder of the ICAA Northwest chapter, had the very same idea. Fortunately for all of us, for both of our chapters, Mr. Harris generously agreed to participate today. Michael Richard Harris studied architecture at the University of Notre Dame, and there, by his own description, fell in love with drawing and painting during his studies abroad in the school's Rome program. He subsequently attended the graduate program in architecture at Harvard University, from which he received his master's degree. And in 2008, he was selected as the recipient of the prestigious Rieger Graham Prize from the ICAA for study at the American Academy in Rome. He is now an affiliated fellow of that great institution, which of course was founded by the renowned Charles Follen McKim. His professional career has been quite diverse, and it's included time in the contemporary design offices of Zaha Hadid and 1508 London, and in the classical offices of Gil Schaefer in New York City, with whom many of you are familiar, as well as Ali Reza Sagarchi's Stanhope Gate practice in London, and Driehaus Prize laureate Pier Carlo Bontempi's office in Italy. It's been a grand journey indeed for a grand talent and mind, Mr. Michael Harris. He now practices architecture as a designer for the Prince's Foundation, where he recently designed the Duke of Rothesay Highland Games Pavilion at Braemar, Scotland, which was opened by Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth and accompanied by His Royal Highness, the Prince of Wales. It is a beautiful work indeed, and I encourage you to have a look at it. So a few words first in context about what we will see from Michael. Drawing a built work of architecture in perspective can be thought of as either commemorative or representational. The distinction between those two is critical. A commemoration is precisely what it says it is, a committing to memory. With drawing, this is done by the arrangements of line and verisimilitude to establish a connection directly with the original, and thus the drawing becomes a documentation to aid one's memory. A representation is different. A representation is precisely what it says it is, a representation. With drawing, this is done by the intellectual act of considering the object, contemplating it, and presenting it anew, afresh, wholly true to the original subject, but at the same time presented in a way that allows the viewer to understand it more acutely, more fully, more profoundly, so that our appreciation of the subject is renewed, heightened, and amplified, and we learn from it. We see this idea of representation, especially in the 18th century work of architects and artists like Giovanni Battista Piranesi, Antonio Caneletto, Bernardo Bellotto, and Filippo Uvara. And in our time, in the work of our speaker, Michael Richard Harris, who is the heir to that tradition. In their drawings, in all of their drawings, we come to appreciate the insight such an approach makes possible. The spiraling gestural swirls of Mr. Harris's columns indeed amplify our understanding of the column's structural origins, supporting ponderous entablatures, precisely because he renders those columns their totemic presence, ethereal and alive, chasing up and across facades. The evocative ambient light and pockets of deepest shade that Mr. Harris so elegantly captures render the compositional volumes of his subjects in full form. The delightful and varied effect of ink wash deployed at the tip of a delicate brush to seemingly sculpt the stone of the building. Walls undulate and shape spaces, arcades flicker in parallax effect, figure and ground dance before us, and sky, the dome under which we all live our lives, envelops his compositions even as it allows light to enter the scene dramatically. This representation is exactly what we aim for. We delight in it, and especially we learn from it in a way we never could with a photograph, nor even with the original structure in front of us. And this all requires an extraordinary intentionality, virtuosity, and agility of effort, emerging almost with the mind of the original architect, translating that architect's ideas and their built work onto a two-dimensional surface of a blank sheet of paper, thereby animating that surface of paper with the magnificence and vibrant presence of the physical structure itself, all seen anew, all made possible by the work of artists and architects, and particularly our guest today, Michael Harris. So it is indeed a special honor to now present to you Michael Richard Harris, my friend, from whose approach to representation we will learn much today as he presents his talk, Pen and Ink Wash, a contemporary classicist approach to freehand drawing. Welcome, Michael.
Thank you so much, Tom. And thank you, Duncan McRoberts and Tom, for having the idea to organize this and giving me the opportunity to really share with you a material and medium which I find really fascinating. And hopefully, whatever your level is, I hope to impart today something I can share with you and maybe even inspire or encourage you to participate in this wonderful medium. The medium is quite simple. It's pen and ink. At the root of all of it, it's simply a nib, a pen like this, show you closely, and a bottle of ink, and that's in the piece of paper, and that's really all that it starts out with. I'll go into the materials in a little bit more detail, but at the basis of it, you can say that that's what we're looking at to start with. Let me go into a bit of a presentation that I can share with you. And basically today we're going to talk about the materials I use. Why would you use dip pen and ink instead of something else? I'll go through a bit of some of the work that I've done and talk a bit about kind of the story I'm trying to tell with it. And also go into some work, some of which Tom had mentioned, that is inspiring for myself, and some lessons I try to learn and try to incorporate into it. And then we'll kind of like wrap things up with a live demonstration of me doing an ink wash. And I'll kind of put in a bit of a sketch somewhere in the middle, just so you can kind of feel from a live perspective. I know a lot of my videos I posted have been like time lapse. Not everything that happens that fast is actually more like real time, a bit slower. But hopefully you can kind of see the pace of work at, and I intend for a lot of it to be really quick sketched to kind of get the vibrancy and energy of what I'm seeing in the subject matter. So let me just kind of switch over into like a presentation. If I can figure out how to share a screen. There we are. I don't know. Okay, well, I hope that's showing. Tom, can you give me a thumbs up if that's showing? Okay, cool. Right, so here we are, pen and ink wash. You might ask yourself first, why would you use pen and ink instead of, say, another material? I think its closest counterparts are in the paint world, watercolor, which is quite similar in the fact that you're bringing the main medium, which is either watercolor, in my case, ink, and combining it oftentimes with water for the wash or the paint portion of it. One thing I think that ink does slightly differently is the pure saturation of the color and that you can get out of it. Whereas with watercolor, and I'm an avid watercolor enthusiast myself, watercolor tends to absorb into paper and gives it a good degree of transparency, whereas ink both absorbs but can stay on top of the paper, and you can get really a strong opacity if you want while retaining certain levels of transparencies. In fact, the real reason I got into ink in the first place was because I was looking for something that was like sort of a deep, rich black for my paintings. I wasn't really finding that with watercolor. So I was in about 13 years ago in a shop in Rome called Poggi, and there was a bottle of black ink. I said, well, okay, let's try this. And that's really kind of how it started. And immediately out of the bottle with the brush, you could get such a rich, deep color with it. So that's kind of like one element of why I've really enjoy working with ink. And then another medium you could slightly compare it to on the drawing side, and there are so many drawing tools out there that I like using, like fine liners or let's say fountain pens, which is probably its closest cousin. But the one thing I would say that the dip pen with its nib has that sets it apart from or the two things that set it apart from the fountain pen is that you can get a real strong degree of flexibility in the nib of the pen, so you can get a high variability of line weight. So you can get ultra thin lines, but you can also get quite thick lines. And whereas with, say, microns or that kind of like fine liner, you're kind of normally stuck to whatever thickness you're buying out of the pack, if you will. Just briefly, one other thing that it's good for, I would say, the Inkwash is that it's good for like fast tonal washes. So if you're sketching on location or if you're sketching at home or wherever, you can do 5-10 minute sketch, throw on a bit of a wash with water, and that's kind of enough to give you kind of a good effect. Whereas, let's say, possibly with watercolor, you have to bring out your whole kit, and the portability of the ink set is quite good. And finally, for water resistance, the black inks are fantastic. They're very water resistant, almost annoyingly water resistant if you want to paint over them. And then the more colored inks, they're, I would say, say the black Indian inks are permanent, the colored inks are resistant, meaning they can kind of get diluted once they're on the paper, which is really fun to work with. And finally, it kind of mediates between drawing and painting, meaning like you're using both the same medium for the drawing element as the painting element, which is great because you don't have to have that kind of like pencil and then paint or pen and then paint. You can really work on that one medium and that one tone, and yeah, and then really focus more on the form and what your subject matter than, say, other things like color or whatever. And finally, it's a low barrier to entry. The nib I use is about 75p or $1, and you can get a nib holder for like £2 or $2, and yeah, and the inks, again, under a $5, you're good. So I'll just go into materials now, and I think this is if someone had told me about materials a long time ago, I would have been most appreciative, because you can spend quite a bit of time, like, just, I know it's quite a simple setup in terms of like what it goes into it, but if you know what nib you're using right from the start, if you're drawing, then it helps quite a bit. So let me just jump into those right now. I'm not affiliated with any of the sort of companies or brands, whatever here. It's just, these are just what I like to use. So starting with the nib, let me pull this over, see if I can, just 1 second, annotate, spotlight, here we are. Okay, yeah, so starting with the nib, this is the Leonard 40 nib. It's the one I use most, and I would say probably the most important assembly. With regards to the pen holder, let me just switch over to, stop sharing the screen. Let me just switch over to this and talk about the materials from here. Yeah, so this is the nib I was talking to you about, the Leonard 40, and this is the pen holder. It's a comic pen holder. Our friends in the comic drawing world use nibs quite a bit. This is great because you'll find that the ones that you get fairly cheaply for like $1 or $2, while they work just as well, they'll, after 1 or 2 uses, they might split. So this one I've had for about a year, no problem at all. It even has 2 settings, both for two like different size standard nibs, and the nib just kind of fits directly into there. In terms of, let me just go back to the presentation, 1 second. Share screen. I'll get into the inks later. I'll get into the inks a bit later, but just to know that you have the Black Indian inks and you have the colored inks, and you can find them pretty much everywhere, I think, at most art stores and also online. In terms of the paper, it's also, I would say, a very important element. In what differs it from watercolor is that for this, I would highly recommend using hot press. And whereas in watercolor, you often quite often want to use cold press or rough paper. What the hot press does is that it's smooth and has a kind of a small grain to it, but meaning that the nib will just kind of flow over it. Whereas if you get a rough paper, you'll start skipping, you'll pick up fibers of paper in the nib, and it can be really just I mean, you can do it. I would say try to use whatever materials you can, but these are just my recommendations, if you will. And then I also use a handmade paper. So the paper I use is mostly Arches hot press, but I also use a one that comes from this fairly small company called Amatruda in Italy. They're located just south of Naples, and they've been making this really wonderful paper that I've been using for quite some time, really for about 20 years. I first bought a sketchbook from them, or from a company in Rome, and it has this just this amazing kind of quality of paper to it. I don't know if you can kind of get a sense of kind of the deckled edges it has, but it actually responds, even though it's a handmade paper, and handmade papers tend to be fairly rough. This one still has a level of smoothness, and you can, it's great for applying to ink. And just on the portability of these are all kind of on location sketches in here. Those were done with a fine liner. So, as long as you have a setup that's kind of, let's say, easy, you're just taking like 1 bottle of ink and maybe you're sitting on the ground outside, or you have a small chair. It's really not that hard. You probably need some water with you on live sketching, or definitely you would, I would say. But yeah, this paper here is fantastic. And it's fairly lightweight. It's not too thick. You don't really need a very heavy paper. I usually use 140 pound. In GSM, that's about 300 grams per square meter. So it's decent size, but it's not like, it's not your 600 or 300 pound papers. So yeah, this is all in that sketchbook, but it also kind of comes in individual sheets. So that's kind of it for handmade papers for now. And let me just go back. Slide. And where else we have? In terms of brushes, I use kind of what I've had for quite a while. They're Sable brushes. Not necessarily recommend buying them now. It's unclear sort of how they're harvested, I would say. So, but what is a good replacement is the Skoda Versatile. These are they quite similar in kind of their springiness and character. So, but in terms of sizes, I use a 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, and on up for whatever, depending on the size of the paper. And finally, a ceramic palette is great to use. It's really easy to clean, and then a ceramic bowl of water. You'll find that you need water just like you would with watercolor, even if you're just doing a drawing with pen. So let me kind of move on from here. Just this is on the nib part. It comes with a wax coating or some sort of oil coating, so you should heat it in water first, or put it in hot water. That will kind of take off that coating. If you don't, you'll find that the ink just kind of slips off and blots your paper here and there. So it's just kind of a simple thing, but it's important to get it off first. In terms of what all of the bits of the nib are called, you have the tines, which are the bits. It's separated in two parts. The tines, and then this big part, which is the reservoir, which helps the ink come out. And you'll want to dip the pen fully beyond that reservoir. Otherwise, it just won't work as well. Yeah, and just one note on the nib I use, I'd mentioned that's quite important. I use this one, the Leonard 40. It's the best one for me. Everyone's got different pressure in the way they apply it, but I find that I can do like up and down strokes, left and right. Whereas with other calligraphy nibs, I've just had such a problem with them. And this is just kind of on the paper again, which I've shown you already. The inks, black inks are quite consistent, I found throughout. I usually use Winsor & Newton or Sennelier's, but I'll just mention that the Sennelier color inks are quite impressive in the sense that they have like a shellac gum to them. So oftentimes inks can be quite liquidy, and this one is really thick. And so you can't use it in like a fountain pen, for example, just clog it up right away. But to paint with it, it's not like, I don't want to say it's like a gel, but it is very viscous. And shellac is something they use in like French polish for your woodwork, or even in nail polish. It's quite nice to work with as a material. And I'm just going to kind of go through here a few examples of drawings I've done and just relate it to the ink, ink colors. Again, like this is of Elizabeth Tower in London, and you have Westminster Bridge going across the Thames. But just kind of want to focus on that first full arch down below on the left. Is like that kind of deep, rich black is really what I kind of like to get towards at least one of my drawings or one of my paintings. And also like to think about the lightest light. So like, where is that going to contrast to? In this case, it's contrasting right against the kind of the cheek of that arch. So, and then this drawing here is Santa Maria della Consolazione in Todi, Italy. And it's one of my favorite churches. It just sits kind of, it feels like it's in a field. It's just outside of this, the town of Todi, or sort of part of it still. But a part of this is one of my favorite ink colors as well, and it's called Bistra. It's an ink color that was used, I would say it differs, let's put it this way, it differs from like sepia, which you're probably familiar with, in that this one is just like much more rich and livelier, I think, than sepia, which can be a bit more dead. I think fellows like Francesco Gordy and even remember when you see something that says brown ink attributed to their drawings, I think this is the kind of the closest approximation of that color ink. So I can't see the chat. So if anybody has questions, please do let me know, and maybe Julie or Tom can mention the question to me. This is an example of both Bistra and Sanguine inks mixed together. So I have kind of like a separate bottle, just 50-50 kind of a Bistra and Sanguine mix. And it kind of like, I think it gives a bit more of a red punch, obviously, and without going full Sanguine, which is kind of like more of this, which is quite red, if you will, really literally blood red. But just to go back to this drawing, this is Borromini's Sanivu alla Sapienza, at least the lantern portion of it, and it's like literally one of my favorite moves in all of architecture. I think many architects share the same feeling. So I wanted to kind of like capture here the kind of the really the raking light that you get on that lantern sometimes. And in order to do that, really trying to go with the darkest darks on part of it, and really the lightest lights in other parts. And then here, this is kind of a mixture of Bistra and Sanguine ink again, but this is done on that handmade paper and also a much smaller format, or much smaller size. One of the things I'll just point out to you in this, and you'll see it again in a few other examples, is that the use of the foreground shadow is like one of the things that I'll try to employ quite often in my drawings / paintings is like a strong degree of a foreground shadow and also a bit of vignetting. So even you see on the sky in the top left and right, they're just kind of dark in there. So it really focuses your kind of attention towards the center of the building. And this really is a study, I would say, of that building. When I talk about like kind of the story I'm trying to tell, and I think about like what I want to get out of these drawings, it's literally, I'm there trying to study the building. I want to express or show the viewer, kind of like what I'm seeing. I think a lot of architects out there, a lot of designers out there, they'll pass buildings and they'll talk to the other architect friends or whatever, and people think they're mad, like, you're seeing all these kind of details, but like internally when you're not with your friends and you're like, and you want to draw this is like kind of like my way of like communicating that outwardly, or at least through pen, at least through ink. And there's a lot kind of, I think you, as an architect, that you see and you just kind of want to, I see that, so here it is, sort of thing. And then the other story I'm trying to tell is really one of kind of light. So it's like, and it's for me, it's just that simple. It's like, wow, the light that kind of cast on a subject, on a building can change throughout the day. It can be so impressive, and it's just, well, let's try to capture that. And then we can also use that as a tool to highlight the architecture itself. And finally, in colors, this is one thing I'm trying to experiment with varying degrees of success, is like using color. So this one, while mostly a tonal wash, I mean, it's mostly neutral tint. And that is like kind of that's a great color because it mediates between a warm and a cool. Like if you add something warm, like you can see there's a bit of sanguine dropped in here on the dome. it'll look like a cool color. But if you were to put blue against it, kind of like you see in the very top left, which is a cobalt blue, well, it looks slightly warmer. So that's why it's called the neutral tint. And so this is really just an experimentation of that. Here again, you see that kind of like foreground shadow, really bright a ground plane, and then like really trying to focus that kind of spotlight on the dome there.
Michael, do you have a moment for a couple of questions?
Yeah, of course. Sorry, I'm kind of rambling. I don't have the chat on the side, so yeah, please. Let me see if I can get it. Yeah, is there any one in particular?
Well, just a couple of them were on the pen nibs.
Oh yeah, sure.
If you want, I can ask the questions if you don't, so you don't have to keep an eye on it.
Yeah, maybe. What was the question on the nib?
Well, one was, what tips do you have for young artists who want to?
Oh, I see.
And then the other was also, other than the Leonard 40, could you briefly explain other nib classifications?
Oh, okay. Let me start with the nib part first. The 40 I found quite early on, and once I found it, I knew I wanted to stick with it. I'd recommend you trying others. The nearest one I found to the Leonard, the 40, is the Brause, B-R-A-U-S-E, and it's called Brause number 361. And it's very, very, very similar. I'd say it's slightly like less flexible, but I have a very kind of light touch, I would say, and some people have a much more firmer touch, and it's kind of like depends on one's touch, I guess. I see the question about Bistra. Yes, Bistra is from Sennelier. At least that's the only company I've found with it. I want to draw blinds like you, and also how they can find their own style. The furthest question: what tips do you have for young artists who want to draw blinds like you, and also how they can find their own style? I think there are three things that you can do. Anyone really to do to improve their work. For me, it was copying or drawing from masterwork. So pick a master that you like, and then just copy it, whether it's Michelangelo, it's Rembrandt. For me, it's like guys like Francesco Gordy, Piranesi, Caneletto, Bernardo Bellotto. So find their drawings if that's what you're interested in doing, and then literally set aside, and then you'll kind of like start to understand and mimic what they're doing. The next one I'd say is draw what you like. Draw something that interests you. If you don't draw something that interests you, then you'll lose interest. You'll do it one day and then you won't do it the next day. So for me, it's architecture. I enjoy drawing other things like fruit or whatever, still lifes. I do figure drawing when I can, not really during pandemic years, but yeah, so draw what you like. That's the next one. And then finally, if you can draw every day, whether it's like 5 minutes, 10 minutes, or if you can get a longer session, that's great. Those are kind of the three tips for anybody to get better at drawing, I'd say.
Another question sort of off to the side in the chat was, how do you have confidence being loose in hand and line work while trying to keep accurate proportions?
Okay, yeah. So I think it's really trying to like keep the proportions first and keep understanding where you go on the page, and it's always like it's kind of a system. Like, is that next to that? So it's getting the proportions sort of right, and keeping a light hand. So I'll kind of go into the demonstration a bit about how I do that. Actually, I can go into a quick sketch in a little bit. And maybe I can kind of cover that there. Might be a bit more. And what technique do you use to get overall sense of drawing proportions with initial strokes? Yeah, so Roy, what technique do you use to get an overall sense of drawing proportions with initial strokes? Yeah, it's kind of dotting out like elements of a drawing first, literally with dots, and then kind of slowly working into with lines, but I'll kind of get into that in a sec.
You keep going on with your presentation.
Yeah. Okay.
A question and answer session.
Yeah. So where am I? How do I get back to this? Okay, there we are. Yeah, and then just finally, there's, like I said, I was experimenting with colors. So on the right, it's more of a red, green, blue kind of RGB sort of thing going on. And then the left, it was like magenta and cyan, or it's really cobalt blue. But like trying to test out process colors and to see what kind of effect that would have. And I don't think that like I've fully run that kind of gamut. Like I want to see much further this can go, but that's for the future, I suppose. I kind of mentioned something about telling a story. I think a lot of it is really just find the story that you have that you want to tell, and try to bring that out. And for me, it really is as simple as it's about light, and it's about what I see in architecture. All right, so here we are, a quick sketch. Okay, this, as many of you are familiar with, is the Tempietto in Rome by Donato Bramante. It's one of the kind of exemplars of Renaissance architecture. And let me just kind of go into switch the camera around so you can kind of get, let me stop the share. Just one sec. So, stop share. Right. And here we are. Okay. Right. So this is really just intended to be like a 5-7 minute sketch, really loose. We'll kind of see where it goes. Bear with me. At the end, I'll do a much longer wash. So if you want to hang out to then you'll kind of get like, I have a prepared drawing for the end. I'll kind of just give that away right now. That I'm going to go over with an ink wash. So this is Santa Maria della Pace in Rome that I sketched earlier today. And I'll kind of go over this. This is based on a photograph I had taken a few years ago. Actually, when I was on a visit with Tom there. And yeah, I'll just go over this in ink wash later. This is done in Vistra ink. But first, let's just kind of do a little sketch of the Tempietto. And I can kind of just describe my process while I'm doing it. So if there are any questions, I can kind of answer as I'm working this out. I'll be happy to. But first, I'll just describe the setup. We have the kind of like the palette, which I don't need to use now because I'm just going to be drawing for a sec. I keep a bit of water here because it helps like kind of get the ink off the pen right away. So like I can just start, just dip into the ink bottle, making sure the reservoir is like fully covered, and go like right away. But sometimes it'll just skip right out of the bottle. So what I'll do is just make sure it's wet, and then that if it ever clogs up, you ever have issues, just get it wet and make sure you just tap it out. And so you literally just have a film of ink there, and then let's kind of get started. Well, here we are. So I'm just going to kind of frame out what we have here. Put that up there. And this it's a 1-point perspective. So we're kind of like look at where is this perspective line. There are kind of buildings kind of coming in from both sides. So that's going to be key to know. But for me, what I'm going to focus on first, and maybe I shouldn't have drawn this frame, but what I'm going to focus on first is just kind of getting the overall shape. And I'll often like just tap out some lines first. So yeah, it's kind of getting the overall shape, getting understanding like where on the page my drawing is going to be. And maybe that's not right. Maybe it shouldn't have been, maybe it should be actually be up there, but I've drawn light enough so that I can like kind of move it around. And then I'll just kind of get the ground of this going. And just kind of thinking about always about the proportion of that element. So this element here. And then, it's this building is circular in plan. Let's see, that's not a, but when you draw, when you see circle in perspective, you know that a circle is actually an ellipse, is an elliptical shape. So this building, which is circular in plan, it's going to be kind of like an ellipse. And so what I'm going to do is just bring a few lines around it, because it'll just drag your eye, just around. And so let's just kind of focus more on the drawing here, unless I'm talking. There we are.
Michael, do you prefer drawing on site or from reference? And do you have any tips on
so
reference?
they're completely, for me, they're quite different. I really enjoy drawing on site, on location. It's fantastic. I think if you have the chance, just go out and draw and draw on location. It's such a live atmosphere on location. There's traffic, there's sound, there's cars, there's people looking over your shoulder, there's all of that. And so it kind of makes it a really fairly intense process. Also trying to transform something in the 3D world onto 2D, whereas like when you're doing from photographic reference, it's like a 2D to 2D sort of thing. What I find in like the studio setting though, is that you can get a slightly more, you can think about your technique a bit more. I don't know, I just find it's a bit calmer in that sense. But yeah, I'd say, yeah, I don't know it's necessarily a preference of one or the other. It's just that they're different things that, and you can get something out of them either way. So, yeah.
Here's one more for you. How do you manage to keep the details you draw before the first wash?
Oh, yeah, that's a great question, because a lot of them actually come out in the wash. But that's one of the great things about it, is because then you just go in later and then re-add the detail. Some stay and some go. So like this is bistro ink, so a lot of the details are going to go. I'm not really, this is a quick sketch, so I'm not really drawing a lot of detail in. But if I were, yeah, so some will disappear, but you just draw them back in. And when you draw them back in while kind of like as you've put on a wash and while it's wet, you get this kind of great thing happening where you're kind of, the pen just kind of starts to bleed, and it just gives this really cool blurry lines, I think, to go with it. And then if you wait till like after everything is dried, then you can just literally go in and oftentimes just put in the detail as you kind of want to. One thing I would say about papers is that this Arches paper I'm working on right now, it's very smooth, and it's very good with the detail work, I'd say. Whereas like more of the handmade papers, you'll just they'll kind of absorb a lot more of the ink. So here, I just want to point out one thing is like, there's this kind of perspective. You should just try to get the perspective right, whatever you are. And here, there's my like horizon line is there. So like if I'm drawing a person, they're going to be like sort of like that. And if he's drawn a bit closer, then I'll just bring his like feet or her feet down a bit closer. And so that helps you get a bit of perspectival, perspective going on there. They're probably a bit small down now that I'm looking at it. And then we've got this kind of sort of tower here. I'm not going to draw that arch going over. So from this, and I don't know, it's probably taking a few minutes now, I'm going to go in with a wash right away. And we'll just see kind of like where we can go, just in terms of it. Let me just put on these columns, and be on our way. So that, again, this is just keeping it really quick. So what I'm thinking here is like, where is the light coming from? And that's the one thing I'd ask you to consider, or like I like to consider before putting the ink on. So I really find raking lights to be very evocative, especially for architecture. So I'm going to get a raking light kind of going in, which means a raking light just kind of literally at an angle, and then also splash it on the ground where, I mean, this is one way, you know, there's a million different ways probably, but this is the kind of like one way I'm going to use. Notice that I'm taking ink almost directly from the bottle here. Something that, you know, you can do, you can be a bit more careful if you want to do more of a gradient wash, but yeah. So we are, and then I'm just going to think about these columns now and what they're gonna look like and what they're gonna do. So also this guy, so the light coming from here, just going to get a bit of a, so if you have these kind of rounded forms, they tend to cast shadows that are sort of like that. I find this kind of elliptical shape, and then if you punch in a little bit of ink there, it might, you know, yield some interesting things. Are any other questions out there?
Are all the light and shadows in your drawings how it looked exactly at the time, or do you add your own adjustments?
Yeah, so yeah, no, most of the time, and I'll go into that in a bit, I tend to change the light coming in, especially in the studio drawing. If it's more of like a live on location drawing, yeah, take what you kind of can get. But yeah, when I go out to I do it in studio, I usually create the shadow myself, based on kind of sort of a, I guess a classic way is thinking of the light coming over your shoulder at 45 degrees. But you know, it doesn't always have to be that way, but that's kind of, it's trying to tell that story of light, I guess.
How about do you dip the brush in the ink? Doesn't it mix? Does the water mix into the bottle?
Yeah, it probably does. I you know, I'll sorry, let's see that. I'll tap it out here, and yeah, it probably dilutes a little bit. I've got, if I need to like undilute it, I've got another bottle here. Just literally pour it in. Yeah, so in a way, I think that kind of resonates more with the kind of style or of how I roll. It's just yeah, I try not to, but I'm sure there is some that gets hidden.
How do you prevent the paper from warping?
So this is on a block, and I don't go in with big washes. So except for the skies, and yeah, you get, when you take it off the block, there might be a bit of, it might not be as straight as if you kind of taped it or stapled it to a board, but it's not very problematic. I haven't found a problem with it yet. You know what I mean? So
Any chance you could zoom out a little bit?
yeah. All right.
Awesome, fantastic. Okay,
Right.
do the lines you draw dry quickly, or do you wait for them to dry before adding a wash over them?
So Yeah, they dry fairly quickly, I'd say. And the other bit is, yeah, so there's not really much time I would have to wait for the lines to dry. And right here, I'm just going to show you, like, I'll go in with this while this is all still wet. And this is where I think you can get the really nice detail. I'm just going to zoom in here so you can see it. Sorry, I've just zoomed out. But, and there's a bit of a happy mistake there. But yeah, you'll get some blots. But really, you can use the kind of the pen as a brush here. It gets really thick. And that's, I think, where you can get a lot of the interest. So just getting ink directly onto the painting itself. You know, maybe you've got like a door and some windows there, and there's a cast shadow here. That's getting messy.
One comment for everyone. Yeah. If you want to only see Michael's drawing, you can click 3 dots in the corner of his image and pin his video. That way, when people ask questions, we won't be interrupted.
All right. So I'm gonna kind of, this was just kind of show you, like, hopefully quickly, just seeing how I'm drawing with the pen. It's a very sort of quick and dirty way of going about it, but it's looking at because the next one is just mostly going to be about the ink wash, I'd say. And so let's just kind of complete that here a bit. And then,
Michael, do you think that the ink is more forgiving than watercolor?
That's an interesting question. I find it's, yeah, in a way it could be. I find it simpler to use because you can go dark quite quickly, and it's forgiving. Yeah, I think it would be. I think it's hard to return from say like a mistake or whatever in watercolor. Whereas this, I feel like with ink you can kind of work with, which it really works with that kind of flat, fast, and sort of that fast sketching style. So, okay, I'm just gonna end this right here. I just wanted to kind of get you, apprised with how I might go about starting or really doing a kind of quick sketch. And I think this part here is the one I would pick up, I would recommend most, where you're really taking ink out of the bottle while the wash is going on, to kind of get a, to enhance the drawing itself. So let's pop back out here. And I guess, yeah, if I wanted to go in, just sorry, one more thing. If I wanted to go in here, I talked about vignetting, is that I might, come in with a sky here, get the paper a bit wet, and just kind of halo the building a little bit, if that's what I'm trying to say. And the point I'll make here is that around the dark edges, I'll often keep it light. Around the kind of more lighter edges, I'll kind of go in and darken it a bit, just so you kind of like, that dark is not going to collide with that dark, and that light won't collide with that light. You can show the form here with the brightest light just by having a bit of sky there. And that's all kind of really sort of the point of showing that. So yeah, this guy needs to be darkened up here and that there. And okay, let me just pull out of this for now and kind of go back into what I've been talking about. Hello. Can you lift off the machine code with the cloth? Would I incorporate any other mediums? I don't. You could. I go for it. Absolutely possible. Can you lift too much ink off with a cloth if you make a mistake? So that's a good question. The thing about ink is it depends on the paper. With Arch's hot press paper, if you go in straight away, it'll stain the paper. If you apply water first, kind of like as a wash underneath of it, and then drop in ink, is a little bit more forgiving in that sense. So I'll also answer that other question. So yeah, then you can kind of come in with the cloth, but you can't really totally ever take out the ink. But if you make a blot, for example, I would either get a brush or very carefully get the end of a napkin, which you should have with you when you're drawing or painting. It's much better than a paper towel, because paper towels will have like fibers that go onto the nib, whereas just a regular little napkin, it's fairly smooth. And for this side, for this painting, I used this very quick sketch. What did I use? I used the 4 or the 2. I used the 4, number 4. I could have used the 2, but this was kind of quick. So, and based on the size of the paper, I wanted to keep it, quite fast. So let me go into share screen. Current slide. Okay. So from there, I just want to talk a bit about light composition and technique, referring to previous, so old masters, and also one more slightly contemporary architect who some of you may have heard of. Actually, many of you may have heard of. It was Michael Graves. This is a drawing he did of the Tempietto on location while he was at the American Academy in Rome. And I literally passed by this every day and just, I just couldn't get out of my head. He was the first one that I saw doing this kind of like this swirly, I'm going to wrap the, swirly kind of like I'm going to wrap the pen around the form. And so you kind of like 3-dimensionalize the sketch. And this sketch, I think, was so fantastic because it's just purely about the volume. So it's not about light. It's not really about composition. That's kind of it in the room at the American Academy. You can just see it's like full frame volume. So that for me, kind of walking by this, it just kind of got in my head, and it seemed like he had a good idea about certain things in terms of 3-dimensionalizing things. I still haven't quite worked out how to 3-dimensionalize in some of the boxes, like circles and ellipses are a bit easier, but yeah, so that one. And then this is going back into the 1700s with Francesco Gordy. I really love his sketches. His paintings are fabulous, but these kind of sketches, some would later become paintings, some would just become sketches, stay in sketch form. But this one, let me just get out the pointer thing. This one, you have the kind of figures popping up, and he loves these 2 little figures, but yeah, that foreground shadow, he's kind of bookending this side, and then that light is just raking in here. And then you obviously get this nice compositional elements here, kind of this one bookending this side. And then the kind of the attraction, but is not on center, is this sort of this church here, and this, I guess, Capriccio, this little architectural fantasy. Let's see if I can get on to the next one. Similar here, just the looseness in his style. I think it's my understanding, and I could be wrong, but it's my understanding that guys like Caneletto, guys like Gordy, like really in the mid 1700s, they were using more of a goose quill or reed, and I think the nib was more developed in the mid 1800s. So they wouldn't have access to the kind of like I would say that kind of materials that we we have from that perspective. But maybe those materials, those instruments, like led them to have this kind of calligraphic style. It's kind of like, you know, it's very loose. It's really, I think it's quite attractive. This is Capriccio with a Roman arch by Caneletto, and what I wanted to show here compositionally is this raking light and raking form. So you'll see, I think the obvious bit of the raking light is here, where it's just cast this way. But if you kind of like look around, you'll see that same angle throughout this entire drawing. So you'll see it here in a foreground shadow. You'll see it here kind of come down. And you also see it here up on the top of the arch, just moving from right to left. And again, it appears in this like lean-to sort of very domestic building, or gatekeeper sort of thing. Just compositionally, I really thought that was fantastic with that kind of raking light and the foreground shadow. Onto this one, not pen and ink. This is a very studied etching that hopefully took a long time. But there's so much going on here, but compositionally in terms of light, you can kind of really see that kind of raking light come in, and he's using the form to rake this way, and then another one kind of coming around here, and just light being cast in so many different ways. Again, darkening out that foreground and really lightening up the background. Something that I find really phenomenal. This one's by Piranesi. And then going into more really getting away from pen and ink, but Bernardo Bellotto and his uncle, Caneletto, really did, I think, quite a bit of, especially Caneletto, did quite a bit of drawing themselves. But here, compositionally, you can see the brightest bright, just really the attention for me is right here, and then again up here. And even this shadow is like phenomenal in terms of it almost becomes like a compositional element itself. And then, of course, you have that foreground shadow, and it's bookended by this great church. This is the Dominican church in Vienna. And then here, Bellotto took his like point of view higher than, well, kind of like almost like a drone, if you will, but like really kind of above the ground, which is different. I would say like that I might take mine, but really amazing nonetheless. So here you got that raking light, the big shadow coming in, and then really highlighting the ground here. So light's not coming from, you know, directly down. So, you know, I'm going to go into a more considered live drawing if we still have time. Yeah. Let me stop the share. That actually, before I get into that, let me share the screen again from current slide. So I'm going to get into a bit of a live drawing or a live sort of ink wash. I've already done the drawing, which I had shown you earlier. And this is a building which you may be familiar with. It's Santa Maria, Santa, it's spelled wrong, Maria della Pace in Rome. It's by Pietro da Cortona, at least the facade element is. And I listened to the most amazing talk given by Thomas Rakovic about this building, and kind of inspired me to just talk about it tonight a little bit, or draw it a little bit tonight. It's really it's quite it's an incredibly sophisticated design. That's an understatement. So as a drawing, it is quite challenging to get some of the compositional elements going correct, because there's so much going on in the facade of this building. But what I really more want to focus on is the light elements. So I've got these two kind of side by side. On the left is the photograph I took. On the right is a fairly quick Photoshop of the light that I want to show. So you'll see down below in the portico, like I'm highlighting some of that, and I'm also raking it the light on the left side, and also bringing it into the ground plane, or at least that's what I intend to do. So we'll see what happens. And then also getting a shadow on this dome. So that's kind of like changing the light, if you will, just to get what you want. Now, if you want, you can like, you don't have to stop there. You can create your own building form. You can create your own architectural capriccio, either from your head or from photograph reference or multiple ones. So it's really about the story you want to tell. And I think for me, that's one thing I'd like to get more into, is the whole architectural capriccio idea. It does take a lot more time in terms of design, in terms of thought. But there's some really, you can do some really cool things, I think. Vanishing Point. This is important to get right, even if you're doing it from a photographic reference, because what happened is, like, if you know where your vanishing point is, that is literally where all the lines kind of meet from in perspective. And this is kind of like a 1 point. You'll end up drawing like up to this kind of string course and then kind of tailoring off, but you really kind of think about that vanishing point. So for me, it's just above this gentleman's head. I think I was on a bit of a rise, and so like normally it would just be at his eye level, but that's kind of about where I'm gonna put the eye level of people, and then yeah. And before I get into that, I can do a bit of Q&A, if there is a lot.
We have a couple of comments and questions.
Sure.
Okay, they're in chat. People are putting them in chat and Q&A.
Okay.
I have to. Okay, bear with me, Michael. I got to get back to.
Yeah. Sure. I'm gonna get kind of set up here.
Okay. Duncan asks, teach us or remind us how, if we make a mistake, to transform it into something that is creative and looks intentional.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, obviously it depends on the kind of mistake you're making. If it's like a pen error, I would say, like drawing, keeping it loose. I mean, by not going too like rigid, I would say, immediately, and not making a line drawing per se, you get a lot of flexibility, and that's really like those kind of swirly columns. Maybe I didn't describe it earlier, but like I do that just to kind of get placement, and then I can kind of like strike a line left and right. But if I'm out, I'll just move it. So there's a lot of flexibility in terms of drawing if you kind of keep that style loose. And in terms of like mistakes, like let's say you have like some massive ink blot, well, you kind of incorporate it in a shadow or something like that, that's kind of the mistake I usually find at least once a drawing. It's inevitable.
Okay, and then do you ever give your art away to your clients, or do you always keep the originals?
Interesting. Yeah. Mostly, I'd be selling the original. Yeah, most of the time, I'd say. I think that people might find that more interesting, to own the actual. Because with pen, you can really get that. There's like layered on top. You can get this. You can feel it, and you can see it, and it shimmers, which is nice. It's not flat. Like you can. So yeah, it's quite nice.
Okay, here's another.
Yeah.
Your construction lines give a really sense of gives a sense of motion and movement to the drawing. Can you communicate the process of how the drawing was constructed? Is this effect important to you for us to see in the finished drawing?
Okay. There's no indication of this. Let me see. Sorry, can you just read? Sorry, Julie, can you repeat that?
That was a long one too.
That's all right.
The
you can find it.
construction lines give a really sense of motion and movement to the drawing. What process do you use to do that, and how the drawing was constructed? Is this an important effect to you?
Yeah.
In a finished drawing?
I think Yeah, I mean, you can use construction lines as kind of like something that adds to it, and that might be like a story you want to tell. Like, there's these little lines kind of creating the structure of it, and that could be something that is part of your drawing. For me, it's really about keeping it loose so I can position things and then slowly get tighter, either with what goes inside or in firming up lines, and that's often what I'll do at the last 10% of a drawing, which is really when it kind of things can pop out, is like really kind of firming up lines, like keeping things light and loose, and then moving more in towards precise kind of. I can go in now into the, you can keep asking me questions. I can go into the live painting, just so that's kind of going on while the,
sounds good.
Okay, cool. Let me, where are we at? 8:16. Let me kind of move into this, right? All right. So hopefully that is something everyone can see. Again, it's Santa Maria della Pace. It's a drawing I did earlier today based on that photograph. Just a note about photo reference drawings. Like I was saying, it's great to get out live sketch. There's nothing like it. But for those of you that say are in lockdown, like many of us are, or maybe you have a family and your full-time job, and it's hard to get out to Rome, or it's hard to get out to the center of your city or your whatever. Obviously, everyone's got there's something around the physical environment around everyone. But if there's like particular buildings you want to draw, it's a great way to pass the time and hone your techniques. So yeah, I remember kind of when I was a university student, like thinking live drawing was the only kind of be all end all, and it's absolutely phenomenal for what it is. But I wouldn't, I would get involved with, if you don't have means to go out, kind of on a daily basis. Let's say you get home late, then photo reference. That's totally a good way to go. Right. So where are we? I've got, and we're gonna put this guy so you guys can see it. This here. And I'm gonna get out a couple of brushes. I usually just take it with one brush. If I was gonna take a long time on this, I would go with like a 2, and that could like take a few hours. But let's, for time's sake, this is like, I'll work between a 6 and a 4 and see where that kind of goes. This is about like an A4 size drawing, or kind of like 9 by 12, just to give you an idea and a scale of sense of what we're doing. But please, if there are any questions, like feel free to ask, and I'll kind of answer as I'm drawing or painting. So I'm getting the ink out. Yeah, go on.
How long did it take you to complete this drawing?
This one was, I want to say like an hour.
Wow.
Hour. It could have been long. Could have been an hour and a half. But I think, yeah, something in that range, I would say. Maybe, yeah. Let's start small and get bigger. How about that? So where am I going to start? Let's see. I usually try like to go with the fairly important element right at the beginning, just to get it over with. But I think in this case, I'm gonna go with like really gonna get the shadow in. I don't even have my palette here. So get the shadow of this building right away. And this is really just kind of pure ink out of the bottle. I'll keep one well, like mostly with pure ink, another one with kind of slightly more diluted version of that. And then, yeah, I won't make an excessive amount of, washes if you want, like, oh, these are my 6 washes. It's really just kind of, it helps the pace if you just kind of like limit yourself to a few, whatever, what do you call these things? little inkwells.
Do you ever use this
yeah.
technique to capture contemporary architecture?
Yeah, I would like to do a few buildings out there. I think just lately I've just been so attracted by classical form because there's so much detail in it, and I really am drawn towards the detail. Whereas I would say some more modern architectures, or quite a few, as less of that. And in particular, I'm quite attracted to, let's say, Baroque architecture, because there is so much detail. I used to not be so interested, as interested in as other forms of architecture, but for drawing, it's really just fun to do. But yeah, I think it's not a no. I think I'll, at some point I'm going to get into it. It's just what and when and how, I guess. So you'll notice one question earlier is like, do you lose lines? Yeah, these are like all disappearing, but it's okay. They're leaving enough there that I can go in later, and kind of pick them up, like redraw them, if you will. It sounds a bit like redundant, but maybe someday I'll be in a place where I'll just literally block it out and draw it later. So I'm gonna kind of darken this up a bit. Yeah, and really going with this with one kind of wash, if you will, here. It's quite dark, all tonal. And what what I think could drag this across here. Let's see if that works out. Let's get this guy nice. And what you can do, as this is still wet, is kind of go in where there might be some shaded elements. Like there was this cornice here, and just pop those up, darken them out. And then there's this kind of like doorway here. And then that will just kind of bleed in. And it just start as a dark base. I'll go over this later. But as a first, I just want to get it quite dark. So I'm not, layering loads of washes in. Right. Okay.
Michael, if your lines end up fading away, why not just mass out the building and then add the details after?
Yeah, I mean, I can still, this is quite a wet wash than what I'd probably normally do. Yeah, you can definitely do that. And it's just, there still are a few things that I can pick out from this, but that is a very valid point. Right, so let's kind of do this guy. And again, similar to the Tempietto, he's got that kind of elliptical shape to him. You want to make sure you have a cornice that can kind of read as casting a clear shadow. And one thing I haven't added is, or shown here, is how I'm going to do like a raking light from here. And that's really probably going to start, let's just say it'll start like right here. Okay, there. And one thing that you want to like be mindful of is with columns. It's okay to have like you don't want to kind of go over into them. Then they become these like kind of twigs. So you want to make sure you kind of keep their massing. So I'm going to spend a little bit extra time here, just so I'm mindful of that. I also want to kind of layer in a dark wash on top, or dark, just drop in some tone there on the top, and maybe punch it up a bit more. So there we are. And then here again, it's going to be competing with this dark, so I'm going to be mindful of like making sure it's slightly different here. here than that, so that they're not like, kind of bleeding into each other. Now it's okay if they do, but like later on, I'll make sure they don't. And then that is gonna go in here. And in case you're wondering, yeah, maybe starting on the left-hand side and working right is also a good idea. Completely contrary to what I've done, because you can like, otherwise your hand gets in the ink, but it's okay for now. It's not gonna affect too much. You can also keep your hand just off the paper. So that's kind of key element. And this guy's gonna be in the dark.
Can you remind us, what is the thickness of the paper you're using?
So this is a 140-pound paper, and I think it's a good thickness for this kind of. It doesn't absorb too much. It absorbs just enough. It's just kind of the right thickness, if you will. I find. Yeah, it'll keep the ink off it'll absorb just enough, but it'll like kind of keep the ink off the paper a bit. So okay, so kind of let's just leave that for now, and then go on to other shadows here. I think we'll rake this one across here. Just want to get them in.
Okay, here's a couple more.
Yeah.
Do you ever like to use more measured mixtures of ink and water when sketching, i.e. different ratios of ink, water in the palettes bowls? Or do you normally keep this more improv, like, do you improv on the mixtures?
I'd say it's mostly like more on an improv basis. It is really kind of like a couple, these kind of two bits. So two palettes here that I'll try to keep this one a bit darker. For like an architectural rendering, like, sitting down and doing a line kind of rendering. Yeah, definitely like Craig Farnsworth had a fantastic presentation a couple weeks ago with the Chicago chapter about that. And yeah, so for kind of like really considered architectural drawings, for sure, maybe, but for kind of more freehand sketch, quick, it's less so. If I'm going to do, a fairly large drawing that's going to take a long time, yeah, I might, bump it up to 3 little ink wells or 4 or something. But I don't know. I just don't. I find that it doesn't like. I might not have that kind of patience, even though I want to. Sometimes it's just it all just kind of end up with 2.
Do you have any advice for working in a more portable way?
Yeah, it's quite. I find this to be quite portable, like as it is. Can you stand and do it? No, that's quite tricky because you do need to. You don't necessarily need a palette when you're out sketching. You could literally dip in water and pop in ink as you need, and kind of like. But that was wrong. There's Duncan. Well, if you're still there, that's your mistake. But we'll see how we can fix that. Yeah, so I think it could be quite portable if you need it to be.
Do you think it's possible for an amateur to do a pencil sketch first? That way it may not wash out so much? Yeah,
the pencil sketch won't wash out, and that's a good kind of brings up a good point. I tend to go straight to ink just for speed, and I also want the ink to show through. yeah, so for sure. And I think when I probably first started, well, not really with this, I was doing watercolor. I would have used pencil first. But then you can kind of get overly, there's a flip side though, because you can get overly kind of, let's say obsessive about like getting everything perfect in the pencil drawing, and which you probably won't end up seeing after you've kind of gone in with the ink. So it's just something, yeah, it's good, but it's also good to throw yourself in with ink sometimes. Just see how you get on, really.
Are there any combination of paper or ink that you do not recommend using?
I'd say I don't really want to push anyone to not use something, because I always think it is good to experiment with various papers and find what really works for you. I know I try to use Khadi paper, which is this handmade paper. It's lovely stuff. It was just really hard to work with, but to be frank, after like working with it, I originally was very opposed to it, but after working with it, it's like super thick stuff, super thick. And, even though it was tough to work into, you kind of get like a fun little, it's something different out of it. So I wouldn't outwardly say no. I mean, you could even use printer paper and get something from that. But my recommendations on paper is just what I found and what I use. So I do absolutely recommend like going and experimenting with whatever materials you can.
Here's a question from Tom. Will you be collecting your works and putting them in a book? They're incredible.
Thanks, Tom. Yeah, yeah. Well, let's do it. Let's do it. At some point we'll get involved. Yeah, why not? Why not? I need to get a few more down there first. I had an idea, and if there's anyone out there who wants to do this, let me know. Of like, so in the École des Beaux-Arts, now this is my understanding, maybe it's a myth, maybe it's a legend, there was this thing called the 24-hour esquisse. And I think they also later broke it up into two 12-hour esquisses, where you had to like come up with a design for whatever building in 24 hours. And that's it. So I had the idea of like some sort of marathon that you could do, not dropping the pen, not dropping the pencil or the pen and ink and see how many you can get out, and then publishing that. But, kind of pie in the sky at the moment. Let's see.
Here's like, I don't know if this is a question or a statement.
Yeah.
The ink gives your pictures a skeleton, but it's the wash that gives them their soul.
Oh, yeah, possibly. They kind of work in tandem, hopefully. But yeah, that's kind of a cool way of looking at it. Like I always feel like with the ink that kind of getting bored with the brush. I'm just gonna go. I kind of feel with just the drawing, like it's not complete and it's flat, and then it just needs that kind of tone on it to kind of to lift it out and make that, give it that three-dimensionality. And this is kind of what I was talking about again with the Tempietto, before with the Tempietto, sorry. Just working into the drawing with the pen while it's wet. I think, just going with straight ink, I think you can get some cool results, let's say. You can get the darks in more precise ways. And then like the nib now has this like, let's see if I can show it to you. It's got a bit of paper on it. So it actually, I think the first instinct is to get it off, but you can actually use that as like a thicker nib. And so you can kind of pick up thick lines eventually you just want to get it off because it starts to annoy you, but it's a good thing to kind of basically get into.
Do you have any thoughts on liquid mask or frisket for keeping small parts of the paper white in the details?
I don't use them, so I don't. I think if it was a very studied drawing, then yeah, it's something I would probably consider. More of a longer drawing, but I think with the kind of the speed I want to go at, it'll just become for me like a bit too tedious, and I might not think about I'll just think about that in the detail rather than the kind of the shadow and the form, if you will. But no, I'm not like say opposed to it in any way. Let's see. So I'm kind of going back and forth with this wash here. It in terms of getting detail and then kind of going in dark in places, just to kind of, because sometimes when it's setting, it's when you can get that kind of interesting parts coming out with the darkness of the. I don't know if you want me to zoom in or not. But here we are. There we go. So this is that kind of like getting like detail back in. This is, I mean, not really detail. This is kind of just blobs of ink, but coming in. But I could. I guess because I've drawn it already, I know what I'm about to draw there. Let's go into that window. So here. So there's a few like thoughts about like how windows are painted. When I was working with Piercarlo Bontempi, I worked with this great architect named Giuseppe Grecci, and he was saying they're always black. So you're going to paint them black. So that's kind of like what I picked up on, and I think there's other ones that they keep it light, but I kind of for windows. I think going dark on them is generally a good idea, except if you're trying to get like a high degree of reflection. So that's another thing that could be fun to like try out and experiment with. There's like one kind of shadow I need to get in, which is this guy. So we're bringing that up, and we're going to rake him this way.
Hey, Michael,
Yeah.
You clearly use wash to sculpt the structure. Can you explain how the additive process of putting down wash achieves a subtractive effect?
How the wash achieves a okay. Let's see. I think what you want to what's important is to know where your lightest kind of lights are, and you're kind of like as you kind of like put the shadow in. I think you're doing two things. You're starting you're exposing where the light is, and then what you can do with the shadow is go back in and that's a bit too dark there. Go back in and work into it. And I think you're going to see here, while it just looks like really boring and brown at the moment, that here is going to be one of the more interesting parts eventually, because then some of the nicest things in a drawing or a painting can happen in the shadow. That's in the exposed light, like this area here. is going to be a lot, quite exposed, is going to be, yeah, it's just, we can just leave that there. And then probably the more sculpted areas, I guess, would be in the shadow. I don't know if that answers the question, but hopefully that's something.
I think so. You know, one of our members has a comment question.
Okay.
The commemorative representational dichotomy at the beginning is good food for thought for him. He has a tendency of being indecisive about which to pursue on a given sketch, switching between both during a sketch, and he feels the result is not great. Do you have any tips on how to break that habit?
Oh, well, I guess is it a bad habit to break? Maybe that's part of what he's kind of. Tom might be good at with that question.
Unmute yourself and answer.
I don't know. How can you break that? I guess it depends what you want to get out of the drawing, really. Yeah. Let's see. How can you break it up? You know, I mean, you can also do two drawings, like do one in one method and one in another, and see, you know, compare the two, especially if you keep them light and quick. So I'm gonna, let's see if this light is gonna work. That helps. Shift this over so it's not so shiny. Does that help? Zoom out a bit. Right, here we are. I think I'm going to bring in some shadow here, some stronger shadow. So down here on the bottom. So basically, I've drawn in some people, and you can see that their eye level is mostly about there. And I'm going to bring in this kind of like this foreground shadow, and hopefully light up this space down here. So it all kind of, you see a lot of light, a lot of light, a lot of light. But let's just see kind of like if there's any success with bringing a good degree of darkness kind of here at the bottom, and really picking up this shadow. You know, kind of reinforcing that, dragging it through. So what I will think about is kind of like, let's just drag that forward. Right across. Now my people are mostly in the shadow, and that's going to kind of help this drawing here. And I'm going to kind of pop them up. Let's just get some pure ink there. Keep that perspectival line there and there. And then I'm going to bring that shadow kind of like up the building. Where are we going to bring it to? Let's just kind of take it to there. And so what it's going to do, it's going to highlight that part more. And let's just kind of see that. And then I'm going to keep these kind of umbrellas. They're going to be that kind of light element in the middle of this shadow. And that'll help you kind of read the shadow more. Here we are.
How quickly do you burn through a bottle of ink?
Let's see. This guy, he could last, if you go really, I mean, if you do a really considered drawing, and I could probably do maybe five or, nah, somewhere between 5 and 10, I don't know, of these kind of drawings. And then you can get a bigger bottle as a sort of a refill, and I just keep that on hand. That's probably why I don't know, because I keep refilling it before it gets to the end. Yeah, so that's it lasts quite a while, I'd say. And the nibs are great. Also in terms of longevity of material, nibs can like last for, I would say, 30, 50 hours, maybe more. They're fantastic in terms of in that respect. but also if you take care of them, you need to, after you use it, make sure you wash it out so that the ink doesn't kind of stay in, especially like dark ink or black ink, excuse me, because that will that'll just kind of just gum up and stay in there. And then make sure you dry it off. And if you're going to store it, either store it flat or kind of pointed upwards. If you store it down, it'll kind of like, it might damage the nib, the point, and you want to keep that, you know, that's the good part. You want to keep that nice and sharp. So I got this shadow kind of coming up here, as if like this building here was kind of coming down and lighting up that. So you want to, something that you can kind of lose track of is while you're doing something quick that things get wobbly. You just want to make sure you have like a straight line. And it's a bit hard to see with this tape, but trying to keep that as straight as possible is important. I'm just going to punch in some more ink here. Really kind of reinforce that foreground shadow. Start adding people, you know, so that'll get you that people in the scene are so important, and just to draw them, you know, you want to make sure that their eye level's the same. Generally, it's sloping shoulders in the head and fairly and kind of going towards. It usually gets thinner from there, let's say. But there's so many different ways of drawing people. It's good just to kind of explore yourself on a separate piece of paper, like how you're going to do it, how you're going to draw figures. But they're very good to add to street scenes because they just give you a sense of scale and how big something is. I hope we're okay in terms of time. I don't know if this is, where are we at? We're almost
doing okay.
Okay. So here I'm gonna take this and just start drawing this door, giving that detail and that pop. And this is what I mean by like detail within shadow, is you get, this is where you'll pick up some interests, let's say, in the drawing. I think, how are we doing this? Can I forget what this one is? So that perspective line, just taking it out to its end, and you know, bringing that out, almost drop the ink. So with this guy, it's that heavy rustication we're going to add, and man, he just needs to get a lot darker, doesn't he? So I'm just trying to separate out what's going on here with the subject, which is Santa Maria della Pace, and I think that'll do it. It's gotten quite thick and heavy, so take some water in there, bring it out. And then there's still a few details to add that we can add over here. Forgot about that light, and also this kind of, what's he doing? What's this guy doing? And in here, the bell. And make that pop out a bit more. And so you're starting to get the sense, I think, of light there. I think darkening that up, it's still got to dry this, but darkening that up, I think, helped quite a bit. And then, so that's really kind of what I'm trying to get at with this really kind of light just spilling into that zone. And here we are. There's a door here, which we can go ahead and paint, taking a slightly smaller brush. This is a 4. And there we are. And we'll pop the top here with a bit darker just to give it a bit of a gradient. So if I'm going to do a gradient, I'm just kind of getting the top in there, and then that'll just kind of flow down to the rest. And I can even lighten it up by taking a dry brush there. And there's an element here that could get a bit dark. It's kind of an opening passage, or no. And then I'm just kind of, again, getting some detail in with the columns here.
I think we might have already answered this, but
Yeah.
classical style buildings tend to lend themselves more to this style of painting.
Sorry, can you repeat that?
Do you think that classical style buildings tend to lend themselves more to this style of painting?
No, I don't know. I think it's something to explore. I wouldn't want to say one way, like, oh, don't explore, because because maybe someone can find a great way of using this way of drawing modern buildings, way that shows off what they want to show off. But I will say that because classical buildings are very kind of attuned to this style, or the pen and ink, just because there's so much about chiaroscuro and shade and shadow going on, and there's so much detail that with the nib you can just pop out, like even just like a dot on the paper can represent like some sort of ornament or detail or whatever. And so that kind of, so in that sense, classical architecture is kind of very much is great for this. I find it's great for this method of working. And I also find that, like, I think it's an underexplored way of drawing in classical architecture, like at least in schools. Like, we often do watercolor and for traditional architecture buildings or classical architecture buildings. And I think there's a reason for not using pen and ink, is because it's hard to, draw straight lines with a ruler, because it'll just bleed out. I mean, there is a kind of a tool you can get in your compass set that you can draw a pen in a straight line, but it's much it's not as good as like a fine liner for that, to say to draw like architectural drawings. So I think what happens is the nib ends up getting lost to all these other like modes of representation, to pencil or to something that's more precise. I think there is kind of a way to use it though, for three-dimensional drawings, and a three-dimensional sketch, a SketchUp model or whatever, if you're a student, for example, or even professional, and then kind of go in and take a view and freestyle it, freehand draw it based on a view that you have. And so in that way it can enter into kind of the more of the scholastic realm again.
Are you working with the paper at an angle, or is it flat?
No, it's flat. So like you can tilt it up, and that's a way to get gravity to work with you. This is like quite a wet wash for what I'm used to. So yeah, that actually might help. But usually how I work is, I would say, isn't so damp and wet. Let me see if there's like another, you can see it, because I can see it's like quite shiny for the folks at home. Don't know if that's helping. but yeah, so yeah, you can do it, but tilted upwards, but not, it's not, this one's not tilted in particular.
Is blooming a concern with ink washes like it is with watercolor?
Not as much. You can get blooms, but it's it's definitely, it's not as nearly a problem. I don't know why. It's a good question, but no, I guess that's a positive direction for the ink. How are we doing? Let's see. And so what I'm going to go in here just on the ground, it's a bit wetter than I'd hoped, but just get some, spot in some detail there, like paving stones, whatever, just to kind of articulate it a bit. There we go. And I see that we're kind of coming to 7 o'clock, right on 2 hours. I can finish this and sort of post it or send it out to you. If we're kind of getting towards time.
Michael, I think that what's remarkable about what you're doing is that in an approach which relies so much on high contrast and the sort of modeling of form with a very strong distinction between light and shadow, the nuance that you're able to achieve in the ambient light, that sense that we can actually feel the air around us in the shade of the foreground, is something that I think you showed that to us in Guardi. You showed that to us. In fact, it happens in Uvara's work as well. That somehow we're sort of drawn into the composition, the sort of foreground of the composition invites the spectator in, and a little bit about the ways in which your modulation of the wash between light and dark and the sort of punching out of line work within shade, how you sort of amplify that sense of what ambient light is and reflected light.
So ambient light, yeah. I think it's just for ambient light, it's important to think about like really what's kind of closer to you, and I think it's as simple as like things that are closer to you. Like I'm going to keep this dome here fairly light, but throw in a bit more detail because he's furthest back, and try to get things that are closer to me kind of darker. So I am going to kind of pick them up here with a bit of detail, and just in terms of like, just in terms of the light spilling in, like, I think it's important that you don't have all the kind of gradients or the shadows the same level of darkness. I have gone quite dark on this one here, but as it dries, it can even go even further dark because it's not completely opaque. That's quite opaque. It just takes a bit of time to draw here.
And you actually have shadow effectively within the shadow or within the shade. So
yeah, that's exactly right, and that's I think where some of the nicest parts of the drawing can happen is like having that shade and shadow, that detail within the shadow. Go on. Let me see if I can move this light so it's less reflective. Maybe not. So I think that one kind of got a bit dark there. I'll just punch in a bit of detail, and I think we can kind of wind it up, and I'll go in and finish it out later. But this is really just to kind of show you like how to go from, you know, a sketch to getting that wash down. And yeah, I hope that's all been quite helpful. Let me show you a bit how this is kind of looking without the tape. Is it kind of a demo? We'll zoom back out. Cool. So I think trying to get it without the switch over to another camera. So I don't know if that reads a bit any better, but basically what I can go and do is fill in detail throughout here and in here, and really, and probably go a few more midtones in here, get some more midtones here, so it's not so high contrast. But yeah, that's kind of like in a nutshell, in a very quick nutshell, how I approach the ink drawing process. And I hope, you know, that's kind of illuminated a bit about how I approach it, how I go about, you know, setting up the drawing, involving light in the drawing, composing something. And I hope also that whoever's still out there can, you know, find their own kind of story to tell, or be inspired, go out and buy a bottle of ink. Really, it's so fast to get out there and try something. Try it, or get back into it. Maybe use it in high school, but go back, see if it's something that you're interested in, because it is such a rich material that and it's fun to work with, and very well suited to so many types of subjects, especially architecture. So
thank you so much for sharing.
Absolutely, absolutely.
It's incredible.
Good. I don't know if there's any other comments, but happy to hang around for a couple more minutes. But if that's it, then you know, everyone go.
Could you quickly flip through your sketchbook and show us a variety of your sketches?
Absolutely.
One of the requests.
Yeah.
And if anybody else has questions, here's your last chance. Put them in the Q&A box.
I'll just point out I had done this drawing a couple days ago in prep, so that's today. That's what I just did. This is the one I done. Let's just say, like, not under the gun. So this one's also dried out. You can see a few differences. I think this one's probably sketched better. This one probably has a bit more. I think the shadow there, for example, being lighter, helps punch that building out than, say, like that one. So anyway, I just thought y'all could see that as kind of as a compare contrast. But yeah, let me go show you a sketchbook or two. Make sure they got the ink put away before I get everything out.
Michael, do you follow any other architectural sketchers like Luke Adam Hawker or Stephen Travers?
Yes, I follow both of them actually, and respect both of their work and in their own ways. I think Stephen has a fantastic work. His work with marker is absolutely phenomenal, and Luke Adam Hawker, especially incredible for his like on-site, on-location sketching and drawing, and also just his kind of like career path, which has been quite extraordinary in terms of going from a designer to you know, a full-time artist. So yeah, both are yeah, highly rated.
And here's more of a comment, but
Yeah.
An attendee says, thank you for showing how dark you really can go. It's always scary for her to really go for the contrast.
There is, you can go layer on just straight ink to straight ink to straight ink. And I mean, I'm gonna say always do that. I think this is kind of a demo and just trying to get as much as fast as possible. But yeah, I go dark, don't hold back. You can always, pull back in the next drawing. This is kind of how it started out this past year and a half. I was really just wanted to get interested in architecture again, and drawing architecture again. I've drawn, probably, since I was in high school, really, but more avidly, and I'd say in the recent past. And these were kind of drawings or studies of buildings that were kind of like, okay, let me try to pick up ink again. Let me try to see what you can do with ink. These are much lighter in terms of how they're sketched. This is Black India ink. Yeah, so this is the Sheldon Theater, and this is fucking Impalas. And I think I kind of stopped there on these guys. This is St. John's at Smith Square, London. And yeah, so there's these kind of like very small sketches. And then this is a sketchbook I was kind of showing earlier, but on location sketches. This was done with more of a kind of this was a G-Tech pen, so not the pen and ink that we've been talking about. Yeah, but yeah, just really that raking light there again. This is kind of like when I started getting into pen and ink when I was in Rome. Just yeah, it's nice, it's thick, it's fun. Different animal. These are more like G-Tech studies of varying coffering patterns. Trying out not very successfully with magenta. And yeah, I think I've shown this is Santa Maria de Loreto in Rome. This is kind of just I'm sitting in the Pantheon and just drawing out the coffers in the ceiling. And yeah, this is Campo dei Fiori, and yeah, that was actually kind of drawn fairly quickly, just really getting that dark layer here, so it could like highlight all of that, which is a lot of what you see in that kind of low afternoon light, or maybe it was kind of yeah, that afternoon light really. And
Michael, how is this shaped the way that you approach making architecture today?
Well, I think let me just click back to the camera. I think that as you're drawing, you're just kind of assimilating like a design. You become, for like that brief moment, you can at least pretend that you've become like Borromini, like where you're drawing his building, so you're understanding his design, and you're kind of just like as if you were a child learning how to write letters, A, B, C, D, F, G, in handwriting. You're learning like that way of designing. So yeah, I mean, if we can design churches like Borromini today, yeah, it'd be great. But you're starting to get that in your kind of like design arsenal, if you will, like, and so that can apply to so many different architectures as well. The most simple too. It doesn't have to be Baroque. It can be like the most simple architectures, and like where you start to understand less about the kind of the ornament and more about the fundamental a building, like drawing trusses and stuff like that. So yeah, it's a learning process, absolutely. And you don't know how it's going to come out, but I'm hopefully it kind of like it stays within you, comes out somehow.
I wish you could see, and maybe you can, that the accolades in the chat section.
Oh, cool.
From all
Right.
over the world. There's still 120 people watching you right now, but from all over the world, people have gathered to see what you presented to us.
Oh, cool.
And
Oh, that's really cool. Thanks for pointing that out. I'm sorry, I've been like kind of head down and looking at, but this is really nice to see, and yeah, some names I recognize. So really chuffed to see all that. Thanks for pointing that out, Tom.
yeah, there's going to be 200 people that are going to go start doing ink wash drawing because of
Hey, the more the merrier, you know.
And we're very grateful for that.
I'm afraid I'm not going to be able to buy these nibs anymore because I actually called the company that makes them. They're called Leonard, and they don't deal with it. They just like make them and send it to a company called Manuscript, and like they said, we can't tell you really anything about them. Talk to those guys. It was hilarious.
Oh.
Anyway, funny stuff. So good. Super. Well, thanks. Unless there's any more questions, I'd really like to thank everyone for joining me. Thanks for making it through. If you made it through this far, hopefully, you know, like I said, hopefully there's something you can take away from it. And please get in touch with me. You can always DM me on Instagram. It's Michael Harris _Bar Studio. And happy to, you know, get back to you and you know, discuss anything that you wanted to ask or you know, would like to ask.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Michael.
For being with us.
Okay. Well, thank you, Julie and Hannah and Tom. I really appreciate you know, the time you've taken to make this happen.
Okay, everybody.
And also Duncan, of course.
Yes. Thank you so much, and everybody have a great evening. And we will have this available on our website, classicistchicago.org /events. We put all our virtual events there. So if you're looking to see this again or refresh on anything Michael talked about, you can find that there.
Super.
Thank you, everybody.